As we work through William Faulkner's The Unvanquished, I want to give you one more kind of critical tool to explore the novel, and that is to think about the topographies that are present in the terrains that are narrated in Faulkner's novel. This follows the topographical analysis of the late literary critic J. Hillis Miller as he explores a sense of the relationship between geography and literature. Miller begins his analysis by thinking about the figure in the landscape, borrowing from Thomas Hardy. And that figure means both the character or the voice that's speaking within a terrain or landscape, as well as the figure, the language or the image that's planted within the landscape. Miller's basic concern in thinking about topographies is, how does a real country or a real place become a country of literature, an interior space that's narrated by a character within the novel or is narrated from an author's experience of the space as well. So, how does the exteriorized version of a country become the interior version of the country or city as it's narrated? Miller underlines that a novel is always a figurative mapping. Again, the image of the land that emerges within the storytelling, and that's how narration kind of creates a space where its characters' conflicts and movements and relationships. Faulkner himself was particularly focused on a sense of mapping. He even drew maps of his mythical Yoknapatawpha County, the fictional space in which his novels and short stories developed. So Faulkner had a strong sense of the imagined place as it reflected a very real Mississippi county of his experience. Versus the pure description that we get in more technical geography, we can think here of a topography as a configuration of a surface, including its relief, the position of its streams, lakes, roads, and cities. And metonymy is the figurative language key to this. How does a place name stand for so much more than just the physical place itself? And you can think about Indiana here. So there's Indiana in the sense of a mapped, roaded space versus Indiana as it works in your imagination. When you say you're from Indiana, you say much more than than simply being from a point on the map. In what ways does Indiana as metonymy, stand for a larger sense of experience and place here? It would be interesting to have students write about that sense of Indiana as a lived space. So place name works as a metonymy. You can think about the impact of myth here in some ways, right? So a place name is a figure standing for a place or space, and what are the implications of this? So a nice example always with this is in terms of the political world. Barack Obama, who emerges from Hawaii and a sense of lived experience throughout the world, is very different from the politician Barack Obama, who comes from Chicago's South Side, right? South Side has all kinds of metonymic implications in defining him. South Side in the sense of African American experience of the Great Migration, South Side in the sense of a political will to get things done. South Side is a sense of very kind of toughened, lived experience. And so, a place has a larger kind of mythical meaning as it's narrated like that. Narration for Miller in his topographies becomes a performative speech act that brings the terrain into existence. And this is not only in a sense of the larger spaces, but also very kind of common spaces. And you can think about how you would narrate the spaces of your experience, rivers that you've crossed, or a sense of crossroads that you've met in various points of life, how those become both real crossroads and figurative crossroads as well. Or you can think about a city street corner and how a street corner has all kinds of deeper meanings in it, of the things that have happened there, as well as simply just being a spot that you could identify on Google Maps. Here, as you kind of rethink the idea of topography, there's a distinction between what's narrated versus a real given terrain. What hidden design in the terrain is remapped deep within the self here. So a space like the Ohio River, which is a body of water moving generally to the south-southwest, that it meets the Mississippi River, at the point of Illinois, at the southern tip of Illinois. How is that a very different space than the Ohio River in a novel like Toni Morrison's Beloved, where the Ohio River becomes the thing that you cross to get to anticipated freedom in the pre-Civil War world. So how do these things stand for larger mythical experience, as well as simply being places on a map? Here you have Faulkner's Yoknapatawpha County mapped, and we can think about the difference between Mississippi as a mapped location versus the Mississippi that is the place of Bayard's coming of age, and how all the mythical aspects of Mississippi are engaged in Bayard's coming of age. This leads us into to thinking a little bit about ideology and the ideologies that are present in the South in the pre- and post-war worlds, and how those leave a mark on Bayard as he grows up. Ideology itself is just kind of a set of beliefs about the political, social, and economic dimensions of a culture. And we've discussed some of these things earlier in the novel, like how civilization was defined in the American South. That the South felt that it was kind of the was kind of the receiver of a classical civilization, despite the brutalities of its slavery economy, despite the brutalities of environmental devastation. There was a sense of honor to the American South that's mythical. And these things kind of work together in Bayard's experience of growing up and how he's trying to order the world within and through the unvanquished. But as Miller will write, ideology is not a self-enclosed dream world. It is a way of representing the relation between the individual and his or her material existence. And this is where the really interesting thing about Faulkner's novel comes out, right? As Bayard moves into adulthood, does he develop a new sense of Mississippi versus the civilization and honor that he receives from Granny, from his father John, and from the others of his world? In what ways is this a new Mississippi to him? And as Miller states it, right, the effort of mapping this kind of Mississippi is interrupted by an encounter with the unmappable. So Bayard experiences the post-war world and the changes and shifts that it brings, and in what ways is this a new Mississippi to him? And the sparks that come off that are the conflicts and turns of Faulkner's novel in the end, right? Will Bayard be able to move into adulthood in this new space? And a lot of this comes down to how Bayard names Ringo and Drusilla, how he understands them. What Mississippi emerges there in Bayard's imagination. There are moments of, to use a nice phrase from Miller, there are moments of brooding recapitulation in Bayard's experience. Moments where he's trying to kind of figure out that world, and he's trying to figure out that world in the midst of post-war trauma, right? You have the displacement of these ex-slaves that are moving through the land. You have unimaginable violence in the land as well, and Bayard is trying to come of age in the midst of this, right? Without a mother and with his father in flight. Bayard is kind of trying to free himself of that past, perhaps, or does he choose to kind of remain in that brooding recapitulation and be kind of mired in history in some ways, right? Where he is left as a, quote, mystified victim of ideological delusions. Some nice examples of this in the novel themselves are, how and why does Bayard become the Sartoris, right? As he replaces his father, as he avenges his father, does he ever escape from the South and the Mississippi of his past? Does Bayard, how Bayard names Ringo, right? When he goes on the journey to avenge his father, he refers to Ringo as his boy. Does he have a new sense of understanding the way that race works in post-war Mississippi, or does his Southern legacy kind of leave him with a racist heritage? When he's with Drusilla, he moves in a cloud of verbena, right? And that sense of verbena is the flower that covers the scent of the decaying body. In Southern culture, when you lay a body out in your home after a death, for people to visit and all, that you would, put flowers in the room, light candles to cover the scent of the body's decay, right? Is the dead body the South here, and he is kind of wandering around in this cloud of the scent of flowers instead of actually engaging the fact that things have died in the post-war world. And that's really kind of the central question of The Unvanquished, right? As he moves through this space and its features, does he ever really transcend the war's traumas and redefine his relationship with Ringo? What Mississippi emerges there?